Welcome back, everyone, to the Human Ecology Project. And tonight, Bill and I are very excited to share with you not only two fantastic close friends that we love dearly, but both of them are advisory board members on our Human Ecology Project. So, of course, we treasure their decades of experience, their knowledge, and they're going to share this with all of you this evening. So Dr. Sailesh Roy, he's the founder and executive director of Climate Healers, which is a non-profit and it's dedicated towards healing the Earth's climate. Sailesh is a systems specialist with a PhD in electrical engineering from Stanford University, but in 2006 he switched careers and became deeply immersed full-time in solving the environmental crisis which is affecting humanity. Dr. Roy is the author of many books and recently published his book, There is a Planet B, which is available on his website. And I have to mention also, a few years back, Dr. Roy was actually the speaker for the proposition of the motion that this house would go vegan. This was at Oxford Union Society, and he won. So welcome, Sailesh. Then we have the fabulous Dr. Will Tuttle, an incredible visionary speaker, an educator, an author, a musician. And Dr. Tuttle, as many of you may know, is a former Zen monk with a PhD from UC Berkeley. He's also been vegan since 1980. Incredible. I mean, how amazing does he look, right? He's the author of the international bestseller, The World Peace Diet, and in 2024, he published Food for Freedom, Reclaiming Our Health and Rescuing Our World. Dr. Tuttle's appeared in hundreds of radio, television, print, online interviews as well, and has appeared in documentary films including Cowspiracy and Christspiracy, to name but a few. And actually, Dr. Roy was one of the co-producers or co-editors of Christspiracy and Cowspiracy as well. So we have incredible talent here in front of you, and along with that, I shall pass you over to Mr. Tara.
Yes, fantastic. We're looking forward to this conversation. I wanted to, before our principal speakers began, to just say that I wanted to start out by locating or identifying three things at least that I think that we all can agree on, because there might be some disagreement about certain things. One of those is that we all agree on, I believe, is that animal agriculture is the most polluting industry in the world, and that it pollutes the air and the water and the soil. It's a catastrophe for the environment overall. So regardless of any other instances, that's, I think, a given. The second is that the consumption of animal-sourced food is the major cause of non-communicable disease. So heart disease, cancers, diabetes, etc., these all boil down to our consumption of animals. And third, perhaps, which I know that we all do agree with, and that is that using animals for food and clothing and in any way other than just being animals, right, is terrible morally, ethically, politically, in every single way. And so those are things that we all agree in. And so to begin this evening, I want to ask Sailesh if he will start out and give a short overview of his approach to the whole issue of climate change, atmospheric change. So if you can do that, Sailesh, we're looking forward to hearing you.
Yeah, let me share a presentation that I normally give to schools, but I'm just going to go through a little bit of that. I don't want to go through the whole thing. I'm a systems engineer by profession, so which means I look at, I don't do science directly, okay? I analyze science. Scientists are the ones who give me data, and I analyze that data to understand how to solve a problem. Now, I know that fundamentally, science is about skepticism. There is no such thing as truth in science. What you find is hypotheses that are tested over and over, and eventually it becomes like an established theory. And what happens to that theory is that at some point, like it happened to Newton, after 400 years, Einstein comes along and says, actually, your gravity doesn't work over here.
Hmm.
And that theory disappears. Okay. So, but now, based on what we know about what's happening in the environment, and I also begin with the assumption that scientists are all fundamentally trying to do the right thing, but they usually get sidelined into narrow focus on what they're doing. Okay. So I begin with looking at the planetary boundaries. That is a framework that the Stockholm Resilience Center worked on. And their current estimate is that there are 7 planetary boundaries that we have transgressed on the planet. So anything that's orange or red is not good because these are the life support systems of the planet. Okay? And so there are 7 that have been transgressed. Now, the least transgressed, the one that just got transgressed a few months ago in a recent paper, is ocean acidification, which is the ocean is becoming more acidic than it used to be, and therefore life is dying. So ultimately, it all comes down to life is dying on the planet. Okay, that's the reason this is a transgression. So when the ocean becomes more acidic, then shelled animals are not able to build their shells properly, and then they start dying off. And when they die off, then it works their way up the food chain. So other animals start dying off. So that's the least transgressed one that just got transgressed a few months ago. The ozone used to be a problem in the 1980s. Stratospheric ozone depletion. The ozone hole uh, was talked about in the 80s, in 87, and they signed the Montreal Protocol, and now it's now in the green zone. It's no longer in the red zone. Okay, it used to be in the red zone. So that's one win that we have as humanity. We supposedly did that, and we did that by just because we were able to make money doing it. That's why it happened. Okay. Aerosols, they still think is in the green zone. The next worst is freshwater change. So you have changed the freshwater cycles of the planet. And we have also basically dammed rivers. We have been sucking water from underground. And so the water cycle has been affected to a point where it's now causing animals to die, wildlife to die, biodiversity to die. So it all comes down to life dying around us. That's why it's a breach in the life support systems of the planet. The third worst is land system change. We have taken more land for ourselves, and there is hardly any land left for wild animals, and they're dying as a result of that. Then comes climate change. Climate change is the fourth worst planetary boundary transgression. And the climate change is broken up into 2. One is CO2 concentration, which is in the orange zone. And actually, I've put a yellow bar there. So for the moment, just look at the orange on the side of that. Okay. And then there is radiative forcing, which is in the red zone. So they are different because radiative forcing is the total heating that we are doing on the planet. And that's measured in watts per square meter, whereas CO2 is the amount of CO2 increase that has happened in the atmosphere from 1750 onward. Now it's 145 parts per million that we have added to the atmosphere. So it used to be 280, now it's at 425. So that's still in the orange zone, okay? But radiative forcing is in the red zone. Now the entire media focus is on climate change only. We hardly ever talk about any of the other transgressions. After climate change is biogeochemical flows. This is nitrogen and phosphorus loading. And so, first of all, why does that impact life? Is because it changes where species have to thrive. So species are trying to move, the so-called isotherms are on the planet that are literally moving. And as a result, if they're not able to move, they die off. Right? Or the climate changes and they die off because they don't have access to food at the right time and so on. So then comes nitrogen and phosphorus loading, which is because of the fertilizers that we use. Okay, it's mainly we are taking nitrogen from the atmosphere and turning it into fertilizers, and that runs off into the rivers. It creates dead zones in the rivers and dead zones in the ocean. Literally, fish die off, and life is dying off as a result of that. Next comes novel entities. So nitrogen and phosphorus loading and novel entities are worse than climate change. Novel entities is basically climate pollution, I mean, chemical pollution of the planet. And the chemical pollution of the planet is from all the industrial effluents. And CO2, we are estimating we are putting about 50 billion tons, according to the IPCC, into the atmosphere. But novel entities, we are putting 220 billion tons per year. So that's the equivalent of 30 elephants per person per year. Okay? And these are chemical pollution that goes into the atmosphere and that comes down in the rain. It's done absorbed in the plants, it's in the water, and I mean it's in the trees, in the branches, and it's in the food we eat. And when you eat animal foods, you get higher concentrations of these chemicals. And so animals that are high up in the food chain are getting more and more chemicals into their bodies through the food they're eating, and they're also dying because of that. And finally, the worst transgression is biosphere integrity. And this is the direct loss of biodiversity. We are losing about 1 to 2% of insects per year and 1% of wild mammals per year. And so we're already down to like 90% loss of wild mammals from what they were 10,000 years ago. And that is the worst transgression. Now, the good news is that the mainstream scientific community has already admitted that animal agriculture, which is shown in the black dots, by the way, this was a paper written in 2017, and in the black dots, they're showing that agriculture, which is basically animal agriculture, is the leading cause of nitrogen and phosphorus loading, of freshwater use, of land system change, of biosphere integrity, and novel entities. I'll tell you why it is still the leading cause. Not only the leading cause, if you eat animal foods, you're going to get more of it when you consume food. So this is why you should not eat animal foods because of that. It's also the leading cause, and I'll tell you why it's the leading cause of ocean acidification as well. But they have been pretending it is not the leading cause of climate change by their own, in the mainstream science community. They're saying it is not the leading cause of climate change. And that's why I was focusing on that. Why is it not the leading cause of climate change? Especially since we know we are using 1/3 of the land for grazing animals, all this land use. Okay. So we know from the land biomass flows that this is the reason why we are grabbing so much from land. And on that land, the trees used to be there. So we have cut half the trees on the planet. And those trees and the soil that they live on, they store 3 times as much carbon as in the entire atmosphere. Okay, so why is it not the leading cause? And that's what I was going through in my analysis. So here is more details on the land use change. I won't go into that. So then I come to the climate attribution myth, which is what I've been working on. The official IPCC accounting says that fossil fuels is the leading cause of climate change. That's the blue, 48%. 13% comes from industry, due to industry. 24% comes from animal agriculture, 5% from other agriculture. Forestry is 5%, 3% from waste, and 2% is other sources. Okay? That's the official accounting of what is causing the climate to change today compared to what it was in 1750. Now, Jared Bishop just wrote a paper saying that fossil fuels is only 18%, not 48%. 5% is industry. 52% is animal agriculture, 8% is other agriculture, 10% is forestry, and 7% is waste. Okay? So he came up with a different set pie chart from the same data. And this is where I come in because I'm a systems engineer. I look at data and I try to understand how do you solve a problem. And so then I took his pie chart, his spreadsheet, and I put in Jim Hanson's latest update on the climate sensitivity of CO2. And I get this number, 66% from animal agriculture, 2% from fossil fuels. So how can these come from the same data? It's all IPCC data. So I looked into why that's the case. Now, the reason IPCC is saying that fossil fuels are the leading cause of climate change is because they do partial accounting. They use partial accounting with just 4 of the 12 emission species that are there in their report. And this is because they are stuck on a protocol that they signed, that they came up with in 1996. They haven't updated it since then. This is the reporting protocol from 1996. So they use CO2, methane, nitrous oxide, and halocarbons. CO2 is shown in yellow, methane is in orange, red is nitrous oxide, and halocarbons is in gray. And they also use something called GWP 100 accounting. So they average the impact of methane over 100 years. And that undervalues methane emissions by a factor of 3. And they do gross accounting for fossil fuels and net accounting for land use change. And that's how they're undercounting deforestation emissions by a factor of 3. And finally, they ignore the carbon opportunity cost of the land that's used for animal agriculture because we know 40% of the land can be freed up if the world goes vegan. Okay? So what Jared Bishop did, every component of what he did has already been published. And so he just used radiative forcing, effective radiative forcing, because that's the red one, that we need to address first in the climate change data. And then he corrected for the CO2 and methane. And then he counted all, 6 heating effects and 5 cooling effects. So not only CO2, methane, nitrous oxide, and halocarbons, but also black carbon, non-methane volatile organic compounds plus carbon monoxide, nitrogen oxides, sulfur dioxide, organic carbon, albedo, and ammonia. He didn't include COC, carbon opportunity cost. So we are now calculating what that is. Okay, and our current estimate is that this goes over 100% when you do that, when you add COC for animal agriculture. So the reason fossil fuels are only 18% is because they emit a lot of warming effects, heating effects, but they also emit a lot of cooling effects by the IPCC's own data. And when you include all of it, fossil fuels becomes 18%, animal agriculture becomes the leading cause. And what Hansen did was to say that the Charney sensitivity, which is the sensitivity of how much heating will happen if you double CO2 in the atmosphere, keeping everything else the same. Keeping all other gases the same, if you double the CO2, the IPCC assumes 3 degrees Celsius increase in temperature at equilibrium. So if you wait a long time, it'll get to 3 degrees Celsius. That's their assumption when you double CO2. Now, Hansen, to explain why 2023 and 2024 had a huge jump in the temperature on Earth, he has been tweaking his models to see why that could happen. And he claims that it's because the sensitivity of CO2 is not 3 degrees Celsius, but closer to 4.5 degrees Celsius. When you put that in, you get the 2%, because you basically now are amplifying the CO2's impact and amplifying the SO2's cooling effect. Because basically SO2 is masking out what the CO2 is doing. Okay? So that's the official story of why 2023 and 2024 were the hottest years ever, according to Jim Hansen. So he's also saying, I have 95% certainty that that's the reason why 2023 and 2024 were the warmest years ever, because the International Maritime Organization had dialed down the sulfur dioxide content. Okay. This is a long way of explaining to you the work that I've been doing in using the data that's already there from the mainstream science and showing why animal agriculture is the leading cause of climate change, according to mainstream science. Now, there are lots of alternate theories. People are cooking up all kinds of theories. But theories in science are easy to cook up. You have to create an experiment in which you can verify whether that theory is validated or not. And unfortunately, we live on Earth, which is a highly complex nonlinear system. And the best way of conducting the experiment is to actually try it out on Earth, which is what the International Maritime Organization literally did, because it just dialed down the SO2 on fuel being used in ships. And suddenly we got a lowered SO2 profile and we were able to verify something. Okay. Now I'm suggesting that when you focus on just animal agriculture as the leading cause of all 7 planetary boundary transgressions, we can help the world to go vegan, and then we can verify whose theory is correct. Okay, this is not the time for us to be promoting alternate theories, in my opinion. Okay, that's my opinion, and thank you so much for the forum.
Thank you, Sailesh. That's great. So, Mr. Will.
Thank you. Okay, well, I'll just go ahead and thanks, Sailesh, for that presentation. And I'll go ahead and jump in here now with so the underlying idea I want to share is that we don't have a climate emergency, and it's not in our best interest to be using this idea in any way because it's insidious and harmful to our well-being, to our understanding, because it's not happening. So I'm not the only one saying this. There's many scientists saying this. This is 31,487 American scientists have signed this petition saying that there is no actual anthropogenic climate change, like human beings are not changing the climate. And I think it's really important for us to understand that. I completely agree with Sailesh and with Bill and Marlene, everyone, that animal agriculture is the driving force behind all this devastation that we see to the oceans and to the rainforests and to species diversity and the chemicals, of course, that accumulate. But I think we need to really understand basic science about our Earth, and because we are being lied to on a massive scale. So the basic idea here, as we all know, is that nitrogen is about 78% of the atmosphere, oxygen is about 21%, argon is just under 1%. So that's right there is virtually 99.99% of the atmosphere, and we have a tiny bit of carbon dioxide and a few other trace gases. Carbon dioxide is only about 0.04%. Carbon dioxide is not a pollutant. This is the thing, it's precious. This is showing what happens to a tree with increasing carbon dioxide. Greenhouse operators put, carbon dioxide into the greenhouses in order to make things grow better and to grow more food. So we should be happy if we have carbon dioxide increasing. That's a wonderful thing. And this shows, for example, rice. Rice at different levels, parts per million of carbon dioxide. You can see we're now at about 400 or so. It goes pretty well. If it was at 800, it would grow a lot better. We could feed a lot more people. So carbon dioxide is our friend, and painting carbon dioxide as an enemy, it's like painting water and the sun and everything else as an enemy, because a 1,000-pound tree, where did that weight come from? The tree did not suck up that weight from the earth, otherwise you'd have big holes around trees. It comes from carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. That's the weight. So this shows in the last 25, 30 years the change in leaf area. So this has really blessed our world tremendously. This additional carbon dioxide, we have deserts are shrinking. We have more, we can grow more food for more people more easily. Carbon dioxide increasing is really fantastic. And we have to really understand that clearly. The next thing I want to point out, and just, contemplate these images, because it's really important to understand these things. The next thing, this is really critical to understand. This is the main thing. We have a carbon cycle. And so it goes into the trees decay, or we eat the plants, whatever, and then the carbon eventually returns to the soil and it gets recycled over and over again. 96% of the carbon dioxide in the atmosphere is from natural sources. 4% is caused by human activity. We really have to understand that. The main one is oceans. The natural oceans are the major source and sink of carbon dioxide, releasing dissolved carbon dioxide into the atmosphere at the sea surface. So one thing that's not reported, because the underlying thing I have to emphasize here, and I'll talk more about it later, is that we have been lied to for the last 45 years, especially since Al Gore came out with his big lie in 2006, and with the big deception of the fact that he said in 2006 that in 10 years, Miami would be underwater and the poles would be melted and the ice caps would be melted and all these things. And nothing ever happened, obviously. So the point is that what has not been reported is that there is increased volcanic activity in the oceans deep down, which is heating up the oceans. The oceans are heating up. That's causing the carbon dioxide to go into the atmosphere. That's causing the increase of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. And it's not human activity. I mean, human activity is tiny. There's also respiration. Millions and billions of animals breathing out carbon dioxide. We humans and cows and all the other animals are breathing out carbon dioxide. We have decomposition. Everything that decomposes goes back into carbon dioxide. Bacteria break down plants and animals, goes back into the atmosphere. Volcanic eruptions bring huge amounts of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. Forest fires, obviously, also, and weathering of carbonate rocks. So we have all these floods of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. And we yell and scream because of human activity, which is virtually nothing. And there's a reason for it. And I'll talk about the reason later. But basically, when you have chemical polluters who are polluting the air and the water and us and animals and killing life, you don't want, they want to blame it on climate change. They want to say, oh, it's climate change. You're the problem. You're driving too much, rather than being accountable for what's really happening. So we should never, ever use climate change, because this is the other main point. Look at this. This is critically important. So-called greenhouse gases in the atmosphere that actually cause the atmosphere to warm up. Water vapor is 95%. Water vapor and clouds are 95% of the so-called greenhouse gases. There's a better word for that scientists are now using. One thing I should mention is that this idea that Earth is a greenhouse comes from the 1700s. It's complete baloney. The Earth is not a greenhouse. A greenhouse is this artificial thing where the sun comes in and the heat is trapped and you can't go out. The Earth is vast, and air can move from low elevations to high elevations and travel around. You have radiative cooling and heating. And so scientists now are saying that we should never use the term greenhouse effect, greenhouse gases, because it's completely wrong. And the words that now they're saying should be used, for example, instead of greenhouse gas, should be radiatively active gases. And there's two kinds of radiatively active gases. There's non-condensing radioactively active gases. That's basically these, like carbon dioxide, methane, nitrous oxide, and so forth. They don't condense. But then there's the main one, which is water vapor and clouds. It condenses, and it's very often 2% of the atmosphere, because it's not a permanent gas that comes and goes. So in the deserts, at night, it gets cold because there's not much water vapor there, and in humid areas it doesn't get cold. It traps the heat in. That's the main thing. So we have been lied to about this by the IPCC because it has an agenda. We have to really understand this clearly. And this is another thing we have to. These graphs can show very clearly that in the past, carbon dioxide was much higher than it is now, and it wasn't a problem. And in fact, if it got down to 150 parts per million, that would be the end of all life on Earth. And we got pretty close to that. So every bit that it goes up, we should cheer and be happy that we can grow more food and we're not destroying, we're not dying off. It's not human activity, though, that's doing that. It's the Earth itself is increasing the carbon dioxide. It's not what we're doing. It's the volcanic activity, primarily. So we can see in the past these things and just contemplate that graph, because this is going back 600 million years, and it was up to 8,000, 7,000, 5,000 parts per million many times. So we have to just understand these, and then also look at the temperature. Compare. First of all, there's virtually no relationship between carbon dioxide and temperature. Carbon dioxide does not have anything to do with temperature. It doesn't drive temperature. This is well understood by scientists who are real scientists, who are not paid by the IPCC to lie on behalf of the big oil companies and the big banks in the background. And there's a reason they want us to be afraid of carbon dioxide, because then they can impose travel restrictions. If you want to imprison cows and pigs and chickens, what do? You take away their ability to travel, and then they're slaves, they're imprisoned. So what we're doing with this climate narrative is basically lying to the people and telling them that we have carbon dioxide causing climate change when it never does anything like that. And we can see here that the temperature is relatively low. We're only at about 12, 13, 14 degrees. And it's been much higher in the past. It's been lower a few times, but basically it's been much higher over the last many thousands of years and millions of years. So these things are important to just understand as background information. And this information that you're seeing right here has been censored. If we had this presentation a couple of years ago, YouTube would take it down. I would not be allowed to show you this. They'd be screaming. They would, if right now, even with this, they'll probably put a warning up saying that it's lying. See, when you're lying, you have to censor anyone who shows something that's actually true. So we have to understand these things. This one shows how carbon dioxide has already used up virtually all of whatever potential it would have to warm the environment. This shows the increase in how all of our COP1, COP2, COP27, they don't have any impact, of course. I'm going to go through this quickly because I only have a few minutes here, but there's been predicting disasters is a great way if you want to enslave people, right? You predict a disaster and then say, well, we have the solution. And we have to be careful about this. They've been telling us that islands are vanishing, and they're not. The sea level is not rising significantly, 1 or 2 millimeters at the most every decade. So the IPCC, as Sailesh rightly says, is not telling the truth. They're not. And they're corrupt. We know that. This is science, right? A bunch of people deciding what science is. Science has nothing to do with opinions. It has to do with research and funding. And the other thing, they completely ignored the Little Ice Age and the medieval warm period. Michael Mann and these other IPCC scientists, we're coming out of a cold period. It was very cold in the 16th, 17th, 18th century. That's why people were starving and hungry in Europe and in China. And they came here partly to survive. And before that was the medieval warm period, where it was really civilization thrived, and we had the Renaissance. Greenland was called Greenland because they were growing food where there's now glaciers, back around the year 1000. So we have to understand that. But if you look at these graphs created by the IPCC that show this hockey stick, kind of like it's always low and then it goes up. And they're lying. They're using just exactly like Sailesh said. You can take data and you can create any kind of lie you want with it. You can just weight things differently. I got my PhD at Berkeley, and I took courses in qualitative and quantitative research methodologies. and something that scientists don't do and most people don't do. And I understand very well how you can completely manipulate data when you have an agenda. And we have an agenda. We have a pretext to scare people, to dominate and control humanity, to turn humanity into livestock. And this is being used to do that. So we have to really understand these things. This is just one example. This is 39 climate models that were given. They all said that the average per decade, they said 0.4 degrees Celsius would be the scientific the consensus. And in actuality, it was far, far less. So again, the modeling, this whole idea, we have models and we make the models with our computers and we can predict what's going to happen. And they have an agenda. And it's important to understand that. So we can see that right now our temperature is not particularly high compared to earlier times. And I won't, there's a lot of things I won't go through. I don't have time. But just, for example, wildfires. In the last 100 years, wildfires have been a lot worse than they are right now. They're not, and we have, I think, quite a bit of hanky-panky going on to create the illusion that we're having climate change. So flood damage is less than climate-related deaths have dropped dramatically over the last 100 years. So all these things, you're not supposed to know this, right? You're supposed to be very afraid of climate change, and we all go vegan for the climate. I went vegan back in I was a vegan activist for 26 years, from 1980 till Al Gore's Inconvenient Truth came out. I never talked about climate because nobody did. We talked about the real things that really mattered. And then when he came out with his thing, I jumped on board for 10 or 15 years. I thought, okay, I'll add climate to everything else, And then I realized, no, it's a big lie. So I won't take too much time, but this is another one. These the ice cores show clearly that if anything, carbon dioxide follows temperature. It doesn't cause temperature change. It comes later. It comes afterward. All of this science is repressed because it does not go along with the IPCC, which was created in order by Rockefeller and by Maurice Strong and these people who have an agenda. And it's not in our best interest. It's in the best interest of those who control the 1/10,000th of 1% of humanity that controls. So, and this was ignored. Like in early 2022, in January 2022, Hunga Tonga, this underwater volcano erupted, sending like millions of tons of water vapor into the sky, into the upper atmosphere. And they said, the ones that knew what they were talking about, said, okay, it's going to be warmer now, starting in 2022 for about 5 or 6 years, because you got all this more water vapor. That's the main gas that causes warming. But they don't talk about that because no, it's because of you, what you're doing, you're driving and so forth. Again, we have to be savvy and understand that we're being lied to. So and the other thing, this is kind of interesting, is just the amount of money we've been spending. $1.7 trillion the United States has been spending for the last 15 or 20 years on this whole climate change charade. And in 1985, renewables were 11% of the energy that we were using was renewable. And today, after $1.7 million a year promoting renewables, and what is it? It's down to 8%. 8% of the energy we use now is renewable. So petroleum has actually increased in the last 25 years. And people say, oh, the petroleum companies don't like the climate change narrative. It's not good for their business. They're lying about it. Really? I mean, look, they're selling more petroleum than ever. And we're cutting down forests to put up solar arrays and destroying deserts to put up solar arrays, putting up these windmills that are killing birds, destroying whales' lives. I mean, cutting down forests to burn them as biofuels. In biomass. It's an absolute environmental nightmare. We even have people like Bill Gates funding projects to cut down millions of trees in the Western United States, because the trees are only going to do one of two things. They're either going to burn or they're going to die and decompose. And either way, they're going to add to the deadly CO2. So we got to just cut them all down and bury them. I mean, So we have to, understand that we're being lied to about all these things. And the other thing, really, is that I just want to kind of wrap it up here pretty soon, but is the idea that we're not being affected by very powerful forces like the sun. The sun changes and varies in how much heat it's giving. So that changes the climate way more than anything we do. And cosmic rays come in and they ionize particles that change the cloud cover. We don't have any control over cosmic rays. There's the Milankovitch cycles that are extremely complex that we barely understand that change the climate. So the point I want to make here really is, and we're being mocked. Look at this. I mean, vegans combining 5+ carcinogens and 10+ industrial chemicals to make food instead of just eating an egg. See, they're mocking us for the stupid things that we say, that we do. We want to eat all these junk food and call it vegan. And when we say, oh, go vegan for the climate, it's like people that know something, that understand that there's an agenda put in place by the people that started the United Nations and the World Economic Forum and the Bilderberg Group and the Council of Foreign Relations, and these wealthy elites, when they're making this whole narrative, and we're supposed to, like, as vegans, go along with it. We look like idiots.
Next
Yeah,
one, Sailesh.
one question that Will raised here that I think is worth looking at, or I'd like to hear your opinion of, and that is the whole relative value of CO2. Like we know that it's a valuable gas in the atmosphere, and that it's used by plants for growth and all the rest of it. What is it in your mind that makes an excess of CO2 be a bad thing rather than a good thing? Because
It's neither.
there's a major difference.
No, I don't say bad or good.
Yeah,
Basically, what it does, it's a catalyst.
right.
So it's a process of catalysis that happens. It's a catalyst that induces more water vapor to be vaporized. So you get more water vapor in the atmosphere when the CO2 level increases. Now, during the Milankovitch cycles, during the ice ages and so on, you saw, as Will was pointing out, that the temperature changes and then the CO2 changes, right, with it. And basically what happens there is that there's a feedback loop. And this is why it amplifies the small change in temperature. It's not a small change in temperature, it's a small change in the amount of heat that comes from the sun on Earth. And the amount of heat that comes from the sun doesn't change very fast. It's very slow. Roughly, you get about 1% for every 100 million years. Okay, 1% increase in the temperature, in the amount of heat that comes from the sun. But what happens is that the Earth, as it orbits around the sun, has these slight wobbles. And these wobbles change how much surface is presented to the sun. So you get slightly, it's a slightly different inclination, it's a slightly different orbit, and so you get slightly different amount of sunlight. And that causes a small increase in temperature, and that then is amplified by the CO2 that comes up as a result of that. Okay, so to me, the catalysis portion of it is what Hansen was also looking at. There are multiple models, climate models, and they decide, they choose how much of. So there are hot models that say that for doubling of CO2, you get a 4.5 degrees Celsius increase in temperature, or you get a 2 degrees Celsius increase in temperature as equilibrium, right? And the fact that CO2 is a so-called greenhouse gas is kind of physics. It's physics that Svante Arrhenius measured in the lab way back in 1896. And the way it happens is that every triatomic molecule or any complex molecule absorbs energy in a certain frequency band. And if that energy is coming from the Earth, which is in the infrared region, you get more energy coming back from the Earth than from the sun. It absorbs that energy and then it re-emits it in all directions. So this is how it becomes a greenhouse gas, because it's absorbing energy in the infrared region And this is how and similarly, water vapor also. Water vapor also absorbs energy in the infrared region in certain states. And when it condenses, it reflects visible light back. Okay, so you get water vapor in multiple areas. So if you ask a scientist how much of the heating caused by CO2 came from CO2 alone and how much of it came from water vapor, I'd say it's 1 to 3. So one for every one amount of heating that the CO2 did, the water vapor did 3 of it. Okay? But it is a catalysis. Without that catalyst, you don't get the water vapor. So the estimate is that if there is no CO2, if all the greenhouse gases are eliminated from the atmosphere, the water will become just ice on the Earth's surface. But if you pump all the CO2 that we have into the atmosphere, it'll become Venus. So as a system, it's a complex system that we are looking at. It is not correct to go back and say, well, it used to be that way, 100 million years ago, and therefore it should be fine to do the same thing today. It's a different system. It's a different initial condition. You have, the whole bunch of forests that got buried under permafrost about 3 million years ago. And they're storing like 2 trillion tons of methane, that's waiting to come up if you just warm it up. And so, claiming that there is no emergency is, I think, false. Okay, according to the mainstream science.
Okay.
Now, I claim, hold on, Will. I have to address some of the things that you said because you're calling me stupid for saying it, okay? And I don't like that.
I didn't say you were stupid.
No, you said any vegan who goes around saying climate is an emergency is stupid. I think that is not the right way to address these things, okay? Because I believe that scientists are trying to do the right thing and that it is through the sin of omission that we get misinformation, not through the sin of commission. There are not, hundreds of thousands of scientists all conspiring to work for Rockefeller. No, it's like, think about how the protein myth is created. The protein myth is created not by telling people, that there is no protein in plants. They don't tell you that. They just keep associating protein with meat. And you begin to think that protein is only found in meat. But if we go back and say, well, they are lying to us, therefore there is no protein in meat, we are the ones who are not looking at science properly.
Thank you. The thing is, science is controlled by the funding. That's the bottom line. And scientists are very sensitive to the funding, and they know who gets the funding. And I've studied this in depth, that there were major changes that happened earlier on. In fact, I used to teach college courses back in the 80s on social justice and cultural change and so forth. And they had the Green Revolution. And the Green Revolution was this wonderful thing, this great miracle. We could feed the world. And what was the Green Revolution? It was the oil companies mainly, and the chemical companies, and the big bankers in the background who wanted to dominate and exploit the less industrialized nations and go into Africa and India and Southeast Asia and South America with a way of growing food that was changed the foundation of food growing from soil to oil, and bring in and force these farmers, basically educate them to use chemicals and herbicides and fungicides and chemical fertilizers, and get them to have loans so they could steal their land, force them into the cities, take the land away. This has been going on since the 80s, and they call it the Green Revolution. And it's the United Nations is behind it. And the United Nations 17 sustainable goals are all about centralizing power in the hands of these same giant corporations and the financial institutions that they control. And around a few years around that time, Rachel Carson came out with the book Silent Spring, which basically scared the heck out of these big chemical companies, because now there was an environmental movement that might hold them to account for poisoning the water and the air and the soil and all of us and animals. And so Maurice Strong and Rockefeller and these people got together and they said, we've got to switch the focus away from us and our pollution to something else. We've got to make the people, they're the problem. It's they're driving cars and they're heating their houses and they're doing all these things. And so we have to make it climate change. It's the same thing with disease. They viruses, they're poisoning the water and poisoning people. Then they pay all these scientists. They create these whole institutes of virology to find these deadly things that are going to make you sick. So we don't look at the fact that our water and air and everything's being poisoned, and we blame it on viruses. And they make more money vaccinating everybody, and they make more money scaring everybody about climate change. The same thing. And we as vegans, it's about truth. We're here to spread the truth that we can thrive on this planet without causing any suffering to animals. And we should never use lies to promote truth. And this is a huge lie. The graphs I showed you, this isn't just my opinion. The top climate
Will,
scientists.
those graphs are all manipulated, Will.
But
The one you're
these are
showing.
climate scientists who are not being paid by IPCC, like William Happer from Princeton and Richard Lindzen from MIT. And
Yes, they are all
these
funded
people,
by the
they're
other
not
side.
paid by the IPCC. The IPCC was put in place as a political arm with an agenda to keep itself funded, and they have trillions of dollars to fund scientists, and scientists are like anybody else. They'll go where the funding is. Like a cow goes to where the food is, they'll go there and they'll make their money and they won't speak up. They'll never speak up. I've seen this. We all know this. And so and then the media is controlled by the same people, and the financial institutions are controlled by the same people. The education system is controlled by the same people. They brainwash out, indoctrinate all of us into climate change. Whenever there's any little thing that happens, it's climate change. They create this weather warfare to create more disasters, and they can blame that on climate change. So I think we have to, we can't be so gullible. I mean, we have to really question why we have these narratives and what the pretext is. Because as I said, if you want to turn human beings into livestock, the same thing you do, you take away their right to travel, the freedom to move. And if you take away the freedom to move, that's a prison. Now we have all this talk about 15-minute cities because of climate change. We have people talking about eating human corpses because of climate change. We have all kinds of hideous things being promoted because of climate change. We should never use climate change as a way to promote compassion and kindness and freedom and liberation when it's being promoted by tyrants who want to turn us into livestock. That is a fundamental mistake, that if we make this as a movement, we're destroying ourselves because we're being laughed at. We're being seen to be ridiculous. But the thing is, there's a 1.7 trillion wave of money that climate people can ride on and keep the illusion going. For how long? I don't know. Maybe it'll go another 20 years. 9/11, people still believe 9/11, after it's so obvious. The planes never bring these things down. People will believe whatever the media tells them.
No,
Fortunately,
I'm not saying. I'm saying that truth is always elusive. You can never assert something is a lie, something is a truth. Okay, like that. It's not cut and dried. It's not black and white like that. And to me, it's about skepticism. Right from the outset, I'm a systems engineer. I look at all kinds of garbage, and then I try to figure out how to solve a problem based on that. Okay? And I know that everyone is funded by someone, and that they have an agenda because they're basically doing what the funder wants. So the funders, it's not that the scientists are conspirators. It's just that they are asked to ask the right questions. That's all. They only address those questions. But those questions, they're coming up with what they think is right. Okay? So, of course, there are scientists who are funded by the Heartland Institute, and they have all kinds of stuff that they've come up with, because that's their objective. The objective is to continue the American way of life, which is consumption, consumption, consumption. We are all being, it's the money game, right? It's the money game that drives. And in the money game, it's ethical to go and exploit someone. And so you're told to go and make as much money as you can, and they're going to do that because that's the game that we are playing. So this is why, I wrote this abstract for a paper on planetary health. And I was shocked when they accepted it because I'm basically sending a paper to a mainstream magazine talking about completely redesigning the entire system. Entire system has to be designed around compassion. I agree with you. But it has to be, but it cannot do that. You have to go to people where they are. Where they are today is that a lot of people are feeling the effects of climate change. India is being impacted left and right by climate change. I cannot go to them and say there is no climate change. That's not true. No, the island of Tuvalu is literally disappearing, right? And so, you cannot go to someone in Los Angeles who lost their home and say there is nothing, nothing happened to you.
Well,
So
that was
these are
blamed for climate
phenomena.
change. Well, see, that's the thing. They use that as the pretext when they don't have any water in the, all these other things, and
Bill, I mean,
they're
why they're
spraying
measuring,
chemtrails, which have metals that make the forest especially inflammatory. I mean, there's so much going on. I love what you're saying about skepticism. I mean, I think there you go. We need to be
yes,
skeptical. We need to question everything, but we need to really question everything.
do
And
not
to
assert
me,
the
like
truth.
when I was
That you
asking
have
for,
truth from, 500 million years ago. You don't. You
well,
don't
no,
have
okay,
the truth.
it's the same,
There's a,
but it's
I
helpful.
look at,
It's helpful to understand these things because you can
the
see the
bar from,
cycles that have happened,
no,
and we
no, Will, I look at the bars from 500 million years ago and I see huge error bars. Because I always start with, okay, what is the error bar around your estimate? And there are huge errors because you're looking at fossil data. You cannot accurately say that was the temperature at that point. And when you do that, that's when you lose me when you show me curves like that. You lose me because I know that the sun has gotten warmer by 1% for every 100 million years. And I know that complex systems, have catastrophic failures as well. That's called death, you know? So you can die. I mean, I cannot model my body. I can model a chip, I can model the object that I'm designing, but I cannot model my body and accurately tell me when I'm going to die because that's a catastrophic system failure.
what I'm
Okay.
asking
Same
essentially
with the planet. The
is to see
planet
that,
also has catastrophic system failures if we
right,
if we
but
keep at it like this.
just to see like who's got their finger on the scale, like who's pushing, who's driving a narrative. When a narrative keeps getting driven with
It's a
so much
system.
money and you're not allowed to question it, does that sound familiar? I mean, these are the kinds of things. When we wanted to go to war with Iraq, we said, well, Iraq has weapons of mass destruction. You better not question that. Then we found out later it was a bunch of lies. And so we went to
Yeah.
war and we got what we wanted. And we have to not be gullible. And I think we have to really understand as a species, when you have one 10,000th of 1% of the human population, 8,000 people with so much wealth, they can control narratives, media, education,
Yeah.
food, everything, that if there's a narrative being slammed continually from the mainstream media and everything else, should I really use that as a way to forward something that's fundamentally, it's good, but we don't need to. That's the thing I think is so important. Like I was asked
No,
back in 2018 to give a lecture on veganism and climate change, and they said, please give us a lecture on veganism and climate change. And I told Madeline, oh no, what am I going to do? I don't believe in climate change. I gave the lecture for a whole hour. I talked about the countless ways that animal agriculture destroys the environment and our health and everything. And then they had a Q&A for another half an hour, and the word climate never came up the whole time. And they were happy. They bought books, everything. We don't have to use climate change. It's so, you can measure and see deforestation and ocean, all these other destruction.
right.
Climate change is incredibly complex. It's like you say, it's so complex. And when we bring that in, we just destroy our credibility, except, of course, we've got this wave of propaganda promoting it, but we're on the wrong side of history. You know, we're on something that's not, we can't say that it's human activity. I think
Well,
we're going over our time, but anyway, I just think that that's the key thing to remember. We agree on basic things, but to
yeah,
use that when it's so problematic, really.
there
I
are,
think one of the problematic things is that, I think that, you know, you can't say that you know the truth.
mhm,
You can give an opinion about what you see, and you can point out incongruities that are there, and then you
right,
can let people make decisions. I mean, it's the same thing with nutrition. It's the same
right,
thing with climate change. It's the same thing with politics. You say that, when we went to war with Iraq, to use an example like that. Well, not everybody said, yeah, go ahead. Some people said, hold on, that sounds like a big lie. And some of those people afterwards, when it was discovered that it was a big hoax, right? Then people start saying, well, those people were right over there. And
mhm,
so we have to keep that skepticism in front of us and keep communicating our experience and where we see the incongruities.
correct.
The incongruities are always going to be there, and there's always going to be the man behind the curtain. I mean, Jesus, you're an American, Will. There's always a man behind the curtain.
That's what I'm saying.
There's always a banker
Yeah,
behind the curtain. And if you start focusing on the man behind the curtain too much, what happens is people see it as a vast conspiracy that's eating their soul, rather than, oh, I've got to look what's being said and use my own intellect to figure out what's going on. Right?
yeah,
I think it's really an important distinction, right? To,
yeah,
to, to what we do. Like they have to be that assessment of things, and let people make decisions. You know, make people make decisions. I mean, how many we're living in a little teeny village now, and there's not a macro. There's one macrobiotic person that came to Marlene's yoga class. Or one
Oh, on vegan.
vegan person rather. And everybody around here eats meat every day. There's a big bunch of them over here across the road here having a big barbecue right now, right? But we've got to be able to talk to those people too,
right.
and not just to the people who say they're wrong, and they're evil, and I mean, otherwise we don't go anywhere if we
Yeah,
keep cutting people out of the picture, right?
yeah. I see it as a system. The system has uh, people who have to play roles in the system to make the system function. And there are, the system has these stable points. And people say that, I mean, the objective of the system is to maintain the power system that's there. This is
Yeah.
maintain colonialism, maintain slavery. They have been maintaining it for forever. I mean, they've been conning us into doing that. Okay, I agree. That's the system. That's the way it is. Now, you don't deal with that by attacking the players in the system. You change the system. So this is what I'm suggesting we should be doing, which is focusing on the system transformation and how that would address all 7 planetary boundary transgressions. Okay. If I now go back and say it'll address only 6 of them, but climate change is a hoax, you know, it's not going to address that. Well, we'll find out. Because to me, any system transformation like this on a planetary scale is you cannot model it. You're going to have to try it out, and then you have to be nimble enough to accept. You have to have the humility to say, I could be wrong in any one of them. And then be prepared to make the necessary changes as you go along. Okay. So
Yeah.
that's the approach I use. For me, it's, when I was working on the internet also, it was the same thing. Nature gave me so many lessons,
Yeah.
that
And
you try it out and you get a lesson.
and
So that's
Well,
it.
you know,
If I can just say, we're with you 100%. Bill and I are always like, electric cars, solar panels. What are people doing? Are
Right,
they going to put that? More stuff going into the landfills? You know, it's
right,
crazy.
right,
Oh, we are
right.
so with you on that 100%. Stop all this nonsense with electric vehicles and electric this and solar panels. It's a nightmare for the planet, right?
See, but their data, IPCC's data itself is telling me exactly that.
Yeah,
Their data is telling me to first address animal agriculture as quickly as possible
yeah,
and then dial down the fossil fuel use later.
yeah.
Okay, because it is contributing so much to the cooling gases right now and is preventing the warming from showing up, according to their own data. So I'm saying your data is telling me to go vegan as quickly as possible. So let's do that. And as we do that, we will see, as the CO2 gets sucked down from the atmosphere, we will see is the temperature coming down. Ultimately, these temperatures that are being measured by thermometers, I can go and tell them, hey, all your thermometers are wrong because you've been cooking up the data.
Well,
You know,
yeah, that's another whole thing, and a lot of them are wrong
let's
because
not go there.
because of
Let's not go there. You know,
urbanization, right? I mean, they were out in the country, now they're in cities. Cities are
Will,
hotter. So
will.
satellite data is a lot more accurate. But I think the key is, like you're saying, where we agree, I guess, on this whole thing. We agree on the fundamentals, of course, of animal agriculture is devastating, is that science is never settled. And
Science is never.
this idea that science is settled and we have climate change, it's anthropogenic, to me, that is such a terrible insidious deception that's being used as a hammer to put us into a prison where we won't have freedom of assembly, freedom of travel, and freedom of speech. If we don't have those three things because of climate change pushing us into 15-minute cities where we can't talk to each other, can't go anywhere, we can't assemble, then we won't be able to save the animals. We won't be able to save anything for the future generations. And so when we have a promise to our children and grandchildren that we're going to protect them, then we better protect the freedom of travel and freedom of speech and freedom of assembly and the other freedoms that we have. And climate change is being used as a way to undermine those. You can't question this. That's what's being told to us. The United Nations said that very clearly. The spokesperson said, we own the science, and there's two things we're not allowed to question. One is vaccinations and one is climate change. That is not allowed to be questioned. We're not going to allow that to be questioned. And they have thousands of people on the internet going in on social media and sabotaging that. So there's a reason for that. And I think we should be savvy and use truth to promote truth. That's my main thing. I agree with you completely that there are these other planetary
That's the problem,
boundaries that are
right?
being stopped.
What is
Yeah.
the truth? And so this is why I say be skeptical even with anything that I say also. Anything that you say, I'm going to be skeptical because I always look at, what feels true to me based on my experiences. My experiences has always been as a skeptical engineer who has to look through the science to understand how to build a product that actually works. Because ultimately, I'm responsible for making it work. Okay?
Well, I think there's one.
And this is why I say, no matter what the climate theory is, no matter what the other theory is, the data is telling us to go vegan as quickly as possible, and that the current data, as it is being presented to us, is telling us it will address all 7 planetary boundary transgressions. So
I think
let's do that. Let's say that
there's
with
one
one
freedom.
voice.
There's one freedom that we can all agree on, and that is that people should have the freedom to be healthy, and
Absolutely.
to eat a healthy diet that's earth friendly and sustainable, and will move
Right.
everything forward, and we can be healthy and be skeptical at the same time, right?
Correct. Yeah.
Well, I want to thank you for having this forum because I think it's really helpful to just share these ideas and freedom of information. Because what you said, Bill, earlier, everyone should have freedom to decide what they want to do, but we make our decisions based on what? On information. And where do we get our information? If it's controlled, then our decisions are controlled. If our
Absolutely.
perspective is controlled, we're controlled. So to open it up like you're doing with this podcast, and I think that's the key, is to get more information so we can make better decisions.
Yeah, it's fantastic. And also, we always know, right? When you speak the truth, you never have to remember what you say.
You're right.
It's the truth, right?
Right.
I want to thank you both for coming on this evening and sharing a time with you. It's great to see you both, and I'm sure that this will stimulate a lot of thought and a lot of skepticism and a lot of inquiry with a lot of people, right?
Absolutely. And as Bill and I both say all the time, you're both gentlemen and scholars with incredible decades of knowledge, and your passion for the same as what Bill and I do every single day. And we love your heart and souls for constantly pushing out your truth to the world. So we're deeply indebted to you all. So thank you so much.
Yeah, great.
Thank you. Thank you, Sailesh.
You well.
And
Thank you,
thank
Bill.
you
Yeah.
for the conversation, the opportunity.
Thank you. Good night.